Hello people of the world, and welcome to today's episode of Coffee Chats with Jax. I know I've talked about some really vulnerable stuff in videos before, but this one is something that I genuinely never ever thought I would put on the internet. I thought this was something I was going to the grave with and was going to bury down deep below so that no one would ever find out, because I was terrified. I have never been so nervous to make and post a YouTube video, but I'm also really excited because I believe this matters. So last week I had the privilege of going to this thing called the Queer Christian Conference in Chicago, and I know a lot of you might be surprised by those words going together, queer and Christian, because there's a lot of people in the world that don't think those words can go together. There's a lot of people in the world that think that if that is how you were made and that is who you are, then you are going to this place called hell to burn forever. I want to be a voice among the other voices that says that that is not true. If someone identifies as gay and Christian, a lot of work was done, a lot of conversations were had, and so being in a room full of so many queer Christians that showed up at this conference, whether that was because they identify as Christian, whether it was because they're questioning if they still are Christian, like anywhere they were at in their journey, they showed up and they were there, and it was really humbling to me to be around that many people with that many incredible stories and that many heartbreaking stories, and it really changed me. I identify as Christian right now. There's a lot I'm working through, a lot I'm figuring out of what that means, because it does not mean nearly the same thing that it used to mean when I grew up. Last year, 2 years ago, 6 months ago. It's constantly growing and constantly changing. But I also identify as bisexual, which means that I have been told that I'm going to hell. Now, it took me until my sister's bachelorette party to be able to say those words out loud, even to myself. I have known this about myself since I was a little kid, and I was really confused. I thought that because I was also attracted to men, it must have just been like a phase or a defect or not something that I had to figure out. So I shoved it way down, and I ignored it, and I never acknowledged it, never talked about it, never even wrote it down. But I thought that I was broken. I thought that I was so different, and I grew up around people who would pretend to shoot gay characters on TV, very conservative, very mean in that kind of conversation. And so I was scared and did not want to make it a part of any conversation that I would ever have, about myself at least. And so at the end of 2017, my sister came out. And when I found out that she was also bisexual, I cried because I had no idea that we were going through the same things. I was so shocked because I'm like, no, that can't possibly be you, because that was me. And we're sisters and we grew up in the same house, and all these things are going through my head. And it stirred something up in me that I had shoved way down. And it brought me to this place of urgency of needing to have this conversation now, needing to get to the bottom of what bisexuality even is, what the LGBTQ community even is. What does the Bible actually even say about it? Because at this point in time, I was really deeply involved in evangelical church world, which not all the time, but a lot of the time does more harm than good, especially in this area. So I just did this thing where I just read a bunch of books and I asked a lot of questions, and all of last year looked like me in these conversations because everybody needed to tell me what they thought about my sister being bisexual. So I heard everyone's opinion. So thank you to her for paving the way for me so that I can know who is and is not a safe person to talk to about this. It was scary to me because the people that were coming to me telling me things like, you have to pick Jesus or your sister, or she stands for everything that's evil and hateful in the world, or she's gonna burn in hell, like all these things they didn't know, but they were also saying that to me. And so I was doing work, I was reading books, I was looking at these what they're called clobber passages, the 6 verses in the English American Bible that people use to condemn homosexuality. I read this book called Unclobbered, and I highly recommend that book to you guys out there. If you're wondering where I have looked into this, that was the starting point for me. And what it does is each chapter goes through one of the 6 verses that people use to condemn homosexuality, and it goes through them and it translates them back to what the Greek actually said, and it talks about what was culturally going on and what the words actually meant and why they were mistranslated and why we think of them the way that we do today. Because back in Bible times, homosexuality wasn't a thing. It wasn't even a word yet. I'm not going to get into that because I don't know enough to be able to teach, but if you're interested in reading books where I have found this information, there's Unclobbered. There's also Kathy Baldock's book where she goes through all the history of the whole entire LGBTQ movement back from like centuries ago, on what happened and what people used to think and each moment that happened. I'm going to put all these books in the description box below. For the longest time, I avoided the conversation because it was inconvenient to me, because I very well knew what the popular opinion in Christian world was of being gay. And it was scary and it was hard. And I freaked out because so many times last year I was like, wait, is any of this even real? Is God real? Is the Bible real? What does any of this mean? But once I got on the other side of that freak out, I started to feel a little bit more free. A little bit more like, oh, I can ask questions that I was too afraid to ask before, and I'm not going to break the Bible. I'm not going to break God. I can find out how the Bible is actually meant to be read, what it actually meant. There's more freedom for self-experience, for self-discovery, for self-reflection. There's more freedom for love. At the Queer Christian Conference, there was a story that was told that I just felt heartbroken about. This kid loved church, and he loved serving, and he loved being a Christian, and he loved going on outreach trips and all that stuff. And in a meeting led by his pastor for missions, him and all of his friends, his pastor calls him out and he tells all of his friends right in front of him, he's gay and he's going to hell. Are you all comfortable with being around him? This kid's pastor did that to him. And this kid leaves and he goes and he kills himself. I have been in places where I've wanted to kill myself, and it's really dark. And I can't imagine a world in my head where it's dark enough to actually do it. And hearing that story, hearing any story of someone who takes their own life, it rips out my heart. And so this guy sharing this kid's story on stage said, like, that's why he's loud about this. And for the longest time, I didn't want to make this YouTube video. I felt like this was my own private thing. I share a lot with you guys on YouTube, and this I wanted to be just for me. But after hearing that story, I realized that this is a life or death situation for not just some people, but a lot of people. Thankfully, when I came out, I was living at my sister's house. I was with her and her wife. I was already immersed in this community full of the most vibrant, resilient, beautiful people who identify as queer, who could help me along this journey, who reminded me how loved I was. Thankfully, I had a whole year behind me of my sister coming out first and paving the way for me to do work, to talk to people, to know who is not safe for me to talk about this stuff with. I had a very, very lucky situation, but not everybody gets that. People get killed for identifying as queer. I want to be another voice in the world that says that is not okay. And if you were born gay or bisexual or lesbian or queer or trans, whatever you identify as, you are so beautiful and perfect and wonderful and loved. And I do not for a second believe in my heart that you were created to go to hell. I do not believe that. I do not believe for 1 second that you were made any less than any heterosexual, cisgendered person. I think being queer is one of the most beautiful things ever because it pushes the boundaries of what it means to be human. It pushes the gender boundaries. It pushes gender roles. When my sister came out, I knew in my heart, I was like, oh shit. And I thought in my head, no way, no way. Because when she came out, I was living in Boston, which was a time in my life that I was the most depressed I probably have ever been, and I did not have space in my head to process that. I did not have space in my mind and heart and body to process my sexuality. But after reading these books and having these conversations and getting to know the most beautiful people in the world who identify as part of the LGBTQ community, and after being my sister's maid of honor in her wedding, marrying her best friend who's a woman, and celebrating and seeing the beauty and the love and the grace and the resilience, I don't think I've experienced the character of who I've known Jesus to be more than at her wedding with those people. People who identify as all sides of the spectrum. And I realized if I am celebrating and so excited about this community and my sister being able to be true to who she really is, why am I not giving myself that same freedom? So I went home from our honeymoon and I did so much research. I read so many books and I asked so many questions because I needed to be sure. Because this was a big decision to make to come out. And when my sister got home from her honeymoon, I told her about me and I was welcomed with basically a party. And ever since then, it's just been this beautifully messy journey of learning who I really am. I was asked recently what I would believe and how I would think if no one else's voices were in the picture. This right now, right here, is how I would think. I know what it feels like to keep my mouth shut when people are saying things that I disagree with. I know what it feels like to blend in, to go with the flow. I know what it feels like to not have my own opinion, but to jump onto someone else's instead because it's easier and it's more convenient. It means less confrontation. And now I know what it feels like to not do that. Now I know what it feels like to really think for myself. To still hear people out because I don't know everything, but to take that information and to come up with what feels real to me, what feels authentic to me. And this is where I'm at. I'm on a journey of figuring out my faith and figuring out what really matters and how to be a good human being, how to actually care about people. I've never felt closer to who I believe God to be. One of my best friends told me one time that learning about who God is like a big puzzle. We all have this piece of the puzzle. And when we meet people and we hear their stories and we ask them questions and we learn how they communicate with God, how they have experienced God, that's when we get to find more pieces of this puzzle. And sometimes we find pieces that fit into ours and sometimes we don't. And the more people and experiences we hear about and we learn and we love, we get this bigger, clearer picture of who God is. That feels real. That feels beautiful and authentic and true. However you see God, however you know him to be, however you communicate with him, that's beautiful. And I'm so excited to learn more because I know far from everything. But this is my story and this is where I'm at. And I'm really excited to learn more. And I'm really excited to see more of what my faith really looks like. Watch my faith grow and watch myself wrestle with my faith and wrestle with who I've known God to be and question the things that I think need to be questioned. So if you are out there and you identify as LGBTQ, you're not alone. Know that it is possible to be gay and to be a Christian. If that's how you identify, then that's beautiful. We got to learn from people who are different than us. And when I say that, I want to be clear. I welcome you if you disagree. That's okay. But the second you start to look at me like I am less than you, the second you start to look at me like I am not as educated, like I am smaller down here and you are up here, that's when it crosses my boundaries. If you have a different view and like, cool, we disagree, this is kind of a harsh thing to disagree on sometimes, like to be really honest with you, because that means that you were disagreeing with the fact that I am not going to hell. That hurts a little bit, but I know that it's inevitable. If you don't identify as LGBTQ and you want to learn more, the best thing you could do is do the work. Go a little deeper. I'm going to put a lot of resources in the description box, the books I read, the podcasts I've listened to. I know the verses already that might get brought up and some of the books below. Go through that. Thank you for listening to me talk about this. Thank you for hearing my story. It feels really free and it feels really loving and beautiful and resilient on this side of things. I am so thankful for the community of queer people in my life who have shown me how to ask the harder questions, who have shown me more of who God really is, who have shown me more of what love really means. Thank you so much for watching this video, you guys. I never in a million years thought I was going to make it, but I did. And I'm really excited for what comes next. So I'll see you guys next time. Real quick before you leave, if you're interested in reading my first book I wrote and published last year, it's called Be Free. It goes through my journey working through shame, vulnerability, and authenticity for the first time. It's a piece of my journey. It's not the whole thing. Got another book coming out soon, but the link to that, the description box below. Or if you want to support me on Patreon, which can be as little as $1 a month, that is how I'm able to do what I do for a living. So please click the link below, patreon.com/JackieGTV, to get more involved in what I'm doing over there. Thanks.